On today's show, what are the top storylines to watch as the Thunder take on the Pelicans in game number 2?
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. I'm your host, Rylan Stiles. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LO Thunderpod. Joining me is Michael Martin at Michael on Sports. Michael, it's game number 2. Game number 1 was a crazy one, but what are you looking for in game number 2? Let's get right into it.
I would say that I'm looking and hoping that we see some of the double big lineups with Chet and J. Will. I think that's a really good option against this team. I mean, the rebounding problems we've talked about it all year until we're just blue in the face, but I don't think that's as like a massive deal like people are talking about. But if you insert in J. Will in that lineup, Chet doesn't have to get down low and bang with Valanciunas as much, and Chet can really roam on the perimeter defensively and just patrol the paint. And then offensively, I mean, J. Will is shooting better from 3 than Josh right now, and he's not the same level of passer as Josh, but he still brings some facilitation chops.
Yeah, I like playing the two together. I would always be curious about the depth past that. If you're going to play those two, I think you got to be really calculated with when you use it, because there's no one else but those two guys that you want on the floor when Valanciunas is on the floor. So you got to be really cautious of like matching their minutes and making sure that you get them, the necessary rest to be able to handle that. But certainly in situations this game, they should be doing that. Maybe even down the stretch of this game, they should be doing that. But I think that ultimately watching how Valanciunas plays will be a big storyline probably every game. And wondering if Valanciunas can duplicate his performance from game number 1. I mean, in game number 1, he had some really tough shots and he had some really nice touch. And that's an area we've seen Valanciunas this season be very inconsistent in.
Yeah, I mean, we did our bold predictions at the game the other day, and I said Valanciunas 20-20, but they lose. So I think it's sort of a situation where he made those tough shots and you applaud him and you say, good job. But that's part of the scouting report and the preparation is you're like, if Valanciunas just goes in there like he's playing late 90s basketball, that's fantastic for this Thunder team, because really where they got hurt the other night was just the amount of threes that were raining in from guys like Trey Murphy, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically just bunting away possessions at that point if you're going to have Valanciunas down there. Trey Murphy is liable to get hot from 3, as he did the other night, having 5 threes. We talked about him on the pregame show where he had 5. He had 5 plus threes in 11 regular season games, including a 10 3-point night. My biggest storyline to watch is I wonder if the Thunder can kind of play a tad quicker offensively. And with that, like, can you go into your 5-out shell more and play CJ off the floor? Because if this is a team that's so desperate for shot making and bucket getters, can you bring CJ to the ball more and get a switch with Shai, get a switch with J-Dub, and really take advantage of him if you're giving yourself that much space? I think that if you play CJ off the floor, where's their scoring going to come from if Lou Dort's genuinely this good at defending Brandon Ingram?
Yeah, there's no creation really either if you can sort of like cut the head off the snake with CJ. And if you really go at him, not only could you play him off the floor, but you could get him in a situation where he's gassed, where he can't do as many things offensively, or maybe he's in foul trouble. So I think that's going to be really interesting. One of the main storylines I'm sort of looking at is the Thunder sort of got like a sigh of relief from winning game 1. Like, they survived. Doesn't really matter how you win, but you won. I wonder if everyone can sort of like settle down and you'll see more of the role players and the shooting sort of bounce back to the mean from this season.
Yeah, they missed a lot of like open shots, and whether you want to chalk it up to like what Mark did of just like this was just a bad shooting night, which happens throughout the regular season almost weekly, but in the playoffs it's studied as though they have some sort of disease, or if you want to chalk it up to 7 of the 11 guys made their playoff debut that played on Sunday, and I'd really say 8 of the 11 made their debut in the sense of Lou Dort has never played a playoff game in front of fans. And they just happen to miss shots because of it. And maybe in game 2, like you said, they'll settle in. I think that there's an element of they obviously not playing like tight, but just playing too amped for the moment. It clearly didn't affect them defensively, because I don't know about you, Michael, but watching game one, and I'm sure we've both now watched it multiple times. I feel way more confident about the Thunder's defense than I do about what the Pelicans did defensively. So they obviously played really good defense, but getting that offensive rhythm back, and knocking down their open looks, I think will be a big deal for this team. If they can do that, I think that they'll have a comfortable win. You see that the Vegas line went from 8 points heading into Sunday. They play that scary game Sunday, and now the Vegas line is 7.5 in favor of the Thunder. So like Vegas clearly was not moved by what the Pelicans did on Sunday either. Where do you land on this game after game one?
I'd say I favor the Thunder, not double digits, but around that line. I think, Mark has talked about it's somewhat beneficial to have less prep time, but I do feel like there's some disadvantage just in terms of like the Pelicans have been in a rhythm. They've been playing for multiple weeks, just like really running fast on that treadmill, while the Thunder, although they've played really well this season, sort of like had that gap in between, and it looked like they were sort of adjusting even with the week off. But I'll say Thunder by around that line, so like 8 or 9.
Yeah, I like that. I think that it's a good point, because you look at the Thunder, this is their second game in 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the most abnormal thing you're going to see across the NBA. Like the schedule's just never set up this way before. So that's another layer of something that's difficult to handle if you're the Thunder. Not that there's any like excuses or that that's going to be the reason that they lose a game on Sunday or lose a game today, but 2 games in 10 days is very, very, very rare. And while it does help you, recover your body, it also can get you a little rusty, out of your rhythms. And that's what we thought. I think we saw on Sunday with the Thunder's offense. You got to handle the off days heading into Wednesday. You got 2 more off days heading into Saturday, and then you can start to settle in, I think, from there with with a game every other day while you're in New Orleans. But what do you think of the overall score, 94-92? Whenever you saw that, do you expect an offensive uptick from the Thunder, or do you think that this is just a defensive clinic series / this is how the playoffs go?
I think it'll bounce back more toward the mean of the Thunder's averages and points per game, but I don't think that this is going to completely just bounce in the opposite way where you go from 90s to 120s every single game. Like, I think that you'll be in the low hundreds. I think that's sort of just the game plan the Pelicans have to have as the less talented team with all their injuries and sort of things that really have the deck stacked against them. So they're going to limit possessions. They're going to play a lot slower, and they're going to really make this like a slog of a game. But I think the Thunder, like we talked about, they're going to bounce back. Everybody can look at the shooting for one game in game one and really overreact. But the reality is, Rylan, they were the best shooting team basically in the NBA from 3 for 82 games. And I don't think we should scrap that just from one game.
Yeah, that's where I land on it. Is I think that they're going to get back and bounce back offensively. And then I think that defensively, I'm curious about how they're going to handle the Pelicans. I think that just as though Pelicans fans are very confident in Herb Jones, as they should be, defending SGA, I think the Thunder fans should be very confident in Lou Dort. I think that he's the perfect mold to stop Brandon Ingram, especially this iteration of the Pelicans team where you need to navigate screens exceptionally well to stay on Brandon Ingram. Lou Dort's the best in the NBA at that. And then I think Brandon Ingram is kind of just like Kevin Durant, where they prefer to not have guys up under them, where conventionally you'd look at them and say, well, you should be using like J-Dub's length or Shai's length on him, when really you want to get under him and not let him get to his spots. And that's what Lou Dort does best, both those things. He sticks on them through screens and plays up underneath of Brandon Ingram. So I don't really see a massive Brandon Ingram turnaround. Now, will he have more than 12 points? I think assuredly he'll have more than 12 points on Wednesday. But laboring to get there and thus halting the offense a little bit, I think will be the calling card of the series for the Thunder and for Brandon Ingram. And then past him, where does New Orleans go? I'm not sure if there's many places for them.
Yeah, Lou Dort and Herb Jones, I wouldn't say there's such a thing as a stopper in the NBA, but these guys are the prime example of making their opponent really work for everything. And Lou Dort especially, just like, it's not just a scoring, like he was getting into BI's dribble. He wasn't allowed to create as much. There were segments in that game where the Pelicans basically just threw in the white flag and they're like, we'll just leave that as just like a sunk cost as those guys over there and we'll play 4-on-4. But Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting, these matchups. I think that Shai, although Herb makes him work a lot, I think that there's some potential for some more cross matching with the Thunder, like we mentioned earlier with CJ, because there was a lot more switching than I anticipated from the Pelicans just guarding Shai.
Two more here. Number one, did anything stick out to you that's like kind of an underrated storyline from this series that maybe, even though we've had 2 days to overreact to the game, not really get enough attention?
I think that there's some element of Mark sticking with his rotations, of just having that amount of guys in a game. But there's also something, and I think you can attest to this because Mark has said it countless times this season, of just throwing things, just trying to get something to catch. And it was very much just an ugly game where both teams were in the mud. And I think that maybe the rotation might get cut a little bit in this next game. And it's not because guys played bad in game one, or it's just maybe because more guys are playing well in game two.
Yeah, there's certainly an element of the Thunder needed a spark offensively. They needed a spark just in general. And they were trying to find the guys to do that. And I like the way that Mark explained it too, of whenever you're needing a spark anyway, and you're used to playing 11 deep, throughout the regular season. You can go get these guys their first taste of this series and what the athleticism's like, what the playoffs like, what the crowd's like in game one. That way, if you and win, you need to pivot to one of these guys. Then it's not a surprise. Like, imagine if they came in with this predetermined plan of like, we're going to play the starting five, and then Kinner's just going to be our five whenever there's Larry Nance in the game, and then whenever Jonas is in the game, Chet's going to be our guy, and we'll play Kaysen and Joe and Gordon Hayward. Like, if that was their plan heading into game one, and they did not deviate from that, you'd have never really gotten J. Will in the game. Of course, you would have never seen how much more valuable that can be for the Thunder. And then whenever you pivot to that in game two, that'd be then J. Will's first ever appearance in the postseason. So I think that's part of it. I think that the rotation will maybe tighten up a little bit in game two, but maybe not in the sense of bodies. I think that you might still see a similar number of bodies, but you might see more minutes allocated to Shai and to Jadam and to Chet and to like the staples, and then minutes dispersed larger to some of the better bench players, where I think that like the bodies thing is always going to be interesting for a Mark rotation, because he's always going to try to get the advantage like at the end of quarters. Not to say that these two guys specifically, but you've seen all season long, like at the end of quarters, they'll throw in there Muscala and Lindy, and they'll technically have played, but they'll have played 2 seconds on a last second attempt at getting some threes at the end of the quarter. So I don't know how much the bodies will change, but I think that you could see this rotation be 9 or 10 tonight, not 11, which is a minor change at the very least.
Yeah, I think it's a good point just about the distribution of minutes more than anything, of where they go. And the reality is, like we talked about the shooting slump from game one, I just do not believe at any point that the Thunder will have another shooting night like that. And the thing is, Mark will shuffle through the guys on the bench. And Rylan, you can agree, disagree on this, but like one of like Kaysen, Isaiah, Wiggs, Gordon Hayward, Kenrich Williams, J. Will, it's impossible that not one of those guys has it in game two. I just don't believe that. So I think that, go ahead.
Yeah, that was my biggest like portion of the preview. Just like previewing this series, previewing this playoffs is just, there's no way that you flip through that entire Rolodex and don't find guys who catch fire. I mean, J. Will provided a massive spark in this game. I mean, the 3 over Valanciunas and what he did on the defensive end to Valanciunas, like that was a big deal that you were able to get by with. And in a 2-point win, you needed every bit of the production that J. Will gave you. So, I think that they're always going to try to find the hot hand, and every night I think that they're going to find one. I think that you look at game one, and to circle back to your point and giving you the floor, I think that you look at game one, everybody, in my opinion, played the worst game that they're going to play. Not to say that anyone played bad, but I think that the expectation would be that they'll have even more production and settle even more in, to where this was the worst version of what this core will look like in this series. And that's a scary thing for New Orleans.
Yeah, I think J-Dub was the only one who just, I felt like, had an all-around great game. I mean, Lou did the stuff defensively, but everybody else, I would say that it was a bit under their standard or way below their standard of what we've seen this season. So yeah, I mean, you're just not, I just don't feel like it's mathematically possible to have 10 guys again have an off night against the same team. So there will be some guys who are cold for the Pelicans who are going to step up. I mean, Herb Jones was like, what, 1 for 5 from 3? Maybe he's 3 of 5 tonight. So there are things that are going to change, but one change that I would definitely bank on is someone from the Thunder tonight, I would say off the bench, is hitting 2 or 3 threes.
Yeah, that's what I'm most curious about, especially like in the course of this series. What does change? Like, does Trey Murphy go 5 for 12 again? Like, or does he shoot even better? Does he shoot a tad bit worse? You mentioned Herb Jones. He went 2 for 8. Does he get to 4 for 8? And then that changes some things for the Pelicans. Brandon Ingram is going to score more than 12. I think we both agree. I think we'd be. I'm not going to speak for you, but me personally, I'd be shocked if he only scores 12 or less points again. But how much more does he actually get? You go on down the list, and they lived with some Najee Marshall and Jose Alvarado threes. They both went 1 for 4. I think that's calculated. And like if Najee Marshall, God love him, gets hot from 3, as Mark always says, you have to give something up. Like, you have to let them do something in the NBA if you want to mask everything else that these teams are trying to do. And then on the Thunder side, I mean, Isaiah Joe went 1 for 3, and we know that he can have a series swinging offensive night. Josh Giddey was not good offensively, but I think that we've seen more since March 1 than not that he's going to be good offensively, and especially against this Pelicans team. Kenrich Williams hit just 2 beautifully lined up open corner threes. You give him those chances again, he's going to knock them down. So like, what all does change and what all does make the difference? So Lou Dort was phenomenal defensively. I wonder what his offensive game can look like if he's exerting that much energy on the defensive end. Is this going to be his offensive role? Which, if it is an efficient 6 points where he's obviously dominating Brandon Ingram on the other end, that's perfectly fine. I just wonder if we're going to see him do both, like we've seen him do before in the playoffs, although be it in the bubble, but it was against James Harden and not Brandon Ingram. So there's a lot of storylines to look forward to in Game 2.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I think Lou Dort offensively, it's just about some of the finishing concerns. I think the 3 ball's been really great. He's one of the few players where I have some concerns about him in the regular season, and then it's the postseason. You're like, I'll give you the keys. Go figure it out. Like, I trust you. And to your point about Brandon Ingram, I think he's going to have an uptick in scoring. He's not going to score 12 again, but I'm really interested to see the volume of shots that it takes him to get there. I think that's going to be the most important factor, because if he gets to 20 points again, 25 points, and it's on efficient shooting, the Thunder might be in a little bit of trouble. But if he's really just going out there and it's like someone has to take these shots, someone has to put the ball in the basket, and it's really inefficient, I think that the Thunder are going to be in a nice position.
Last question, Michael. Did anything change from your view from Sunday to now? I think that in the preview, we both have Thunder in 5. Did anything make you pause and like maybe change anything about your predictions?
Not really. I mean, we can say this over and over like we have on this pod of just saying that it's an aberration of a game. And I think that the Pelicans are still going to make all these games competitive and close, but I think the Thunder's top end talent is just going to overcome them.
Yeah, I would agree. I still have Thunder in 5. Michael, this was a lot of fun. Check out Michael on Sports on Twitter. Check out Let's Talk Thunder on YouTube. What do you got cooking up, Mr. Martin?
Well, we're driving down to New Orleans on Friday, but I'm working on a couple breakdowns, one about Chet's rookie season and sort of some of the historic context of that. And then a few other things. I'm going to try to get into some more post-game things with the playoffs, and then we'll do more of these pre-game sort of pressers or whatever, or pre-game previews.
Pre-game, well, it is kind of like a presser. I am kind of quizzing you on what's happening with this team. But Michael, thanks for joining us again. Go check out Let's Talk Thunder on YouTube, anywhere else you get your podcast from too, for the podcast side of Let's Talk Thunder. Also some good video essays over there. Until post-game, be good and be good to one